there's always a bell curve of ability to see the writing on the wall, and effectively it's the role of the intellectuals, the thinkers, to read that writing on the wall, and then to explain to the masses what's happening. That's traditionally the role. That's what intellectuals do. That's what they're for. So it's up to the artificial intelligence, artificial brain community researchers to raise the alarm, to make society competent and aware that this huge problem is coming. Just to spell out the enormous potential, if that's the right word, threat, if you like, of future computers, of future artificial intelligence, and to well, as the Americans say, to rattle people's cages, right? Make them conscious of what's coming. Now, the intellectuals, the thinkers in this area have an obligation to raise the alarm. I think it'd be irresponsible if they don't. So how to get Joe Sixpack to pay attention to what's coming? Well, that's a good question. So I guess it's equivalent to asking, well, what phenomenon, what event, what thing would really make people sit up and take notice? And I've been asking myself that for quite a while. I think it'll probably be when people, everybody effectively, starts talking with their machines. And then or another possibility is when they start buying home robots that are generally useful, intelligent, and they do the household tasks and so forth. And over a period of a decade or so, they may change the model of their home robot and see it get smarter and smarter at each time they change the model. And then once they've done that several times, they will, virtually everybody will see the trend that these home robots, the artificial brains controlling the home robots, are getting smarter and smarter. And that IQ gap, human level intelligence and robot or machine level intelligence is about here, but it's rising. So the IQ gap is closing. Now, I'm predicting 2020s probably in that decade, 2030s maybe, when the IQ gap between human level and machine level, when that gap really seriously starts closing and everyone sees it, billions of people see that gap closing, that's when I see people really waking up. Then this question of species dominance will just be everywhere. The media, the barbecue conversation topics, all that stuff, it would just dominate because it'll be the dominating reality of our times. Well, near future times. We're not quite there yet, but there are enough documentaries coming out this year, and have already come out, but at least in the United States, this will be mainstream. And then of course Europe and so on will catch up pretty quickly. Once America pushes something hard, then usually the rest of the world, just by the flood of American media spreading throughout the world, then usually the rest of the world catches up pretty fast. So that's 2011 as we speak. My prediction is 3 to 5 years. It will be your average educated person will be as aware of this species dominance issue as she is today of, let's say, the climate change, global warming, ozone layer, nuclear holocaust, poverty, starvation, those sorts of major world problems. They will be as well informed on the basic ideas of the species dominance issue as they are of those other topics. Now, that's not the case today, because this whole way of thinking is still rather fringy. It's largely confined to the techies, and that's not surprising, of course, because it's the techies who are creating the problem. Right? And of course, they're more aware of the problem because they're in the thick of it. They're the guys creating the problem. So they then need to educate the public about what's coming, starting with other thinkers in other specialties outside the technical fields, particularly the social science guys, historians, philosophers, political scientists, and sociologists and psychologists and so on. It'll be nice to get them into the act as well, because this problem is so enormous, so vast, that it should not be confined to the techies. It's too big for that. Well, I see women coming into it, I guess given the nature of the way this whole issue started, because if you think about it, it's technology driven, right? Nanotech, neuroscience, the computers, power, species dominance. Yeah, they're all sort of typically male sort of interests, so it's not surprising that it started with the males. For example, the stuff that I do, well, before I retired and switched careers, artificial brains and stuff, I'd go to conferences, and not only were there no women amongst the speakers, but quite often there'd be no women amongst the audience. Right? It was a male-dominated interest. So, given the nature of the topic, I'm not at all surprised. How many techies are female? Right? Like, do you associate in your brain, your mind, geek, the word geek, and female? Do you know any female geeks? It's almost implicit that they're male, right? So to start with, it's a male phenomenon. That's sort of normal, given the nature of the beast. But as the issue goes more and more public, and as these, for example, as machines become increasingly, let's say, social, like, and when we start talking with our machines, and they keep getting smarter and smarter, and then primitive relationships can start between humans and machines, and women who, females, the female brain, male and female brain, women are genetically programmed to be more interested in people and relationships and so forth. So once the machines start offering capacities that women find attractive, that they're interested in, then of course women will get much more heavily involved. And then as they start to become, the machines start to become threatening, like, well, let's give an extreme case. I don't know if this has been tested or not, but when push really comes to shove, if a woman is forced to choose between her child and her husband, I think most women would choose their children, right? That makes Darwinian sense to me. So if this species dominance issue heats up enough that women start feeling perhaps they might lose their children, you're touching the most potent female buttons, right? Then I can imagine women getting involved in a major way. But there's still plenty of thinking women, so I wouldn't be at all surprised. Within the decade, you'll see large numbers of women getting involved in this issue. As the species dominance issue moves out of the domain of the techies, once the techie monopoly of this issue dilutes, stops, and then a greater range of society gets involved, that will include women. And that'll be a good thing, because then you'll get the sort of female perspective on the problem. I personally get impatient myself, because I'm in my 60s, and I look at, I've been talking this stuff for 20 years, but as kind of intellectual crying in the wilderness sort of thing. No one listens because it's ahead of its time. And it's only now that the whole movement, the species dominance movement, has moved into phase 3, Phase 1 being intellectuals crowing in the wilderness. Phase 2 is interest groups. So there are thousands of people now with their own organizations and websites and so forth. And it's only now that Phase 3 is occurring, and that is transfer of the knowledge and arguments from the interest groups to the journalists, into the mass media, and hence going mainstream. Then Phase 4 will be politics. And once everybody's heard of it, then you'll start getting the political consequences and organizations being formed and pro and con and all the ideological differences and so forth. So once it goes mainstream, so that's Phase 3, then I see large numbers of women getting involved. That seems to me common sense. So the cyborgian pioneers, more likely to be male or female. Well, men traditionally have always been the risk takers. Women need to be more conservative because they're the ones who produce the next generation, and so they have to be more careful. So I see the males being the early cyborgs, and once it's been proven to be fairly safe, at least in the early days, then I see the women following. That's the traditional pattern. So, do I think that fathers would be more inclined to cyborg their children than mothers? It's a tough one. I think from the mother's point of view, having a good relationship with the children is very important, particularly between, say, mothers and daughters. So if the mothers, felt that there's a risk that by cyborging the children, that might jeopardize the quality of the relationship, human to human, they might be more reluctant to take the risk. I mean, this is a tough call. I mean, we're talking about the future. It's really hard to predict the future. My gut feeling would be that probably the mothers would be less likely to take the risk. That would probably be the direction that the cyborgs would go. I mean, so much of the relationships that we humans have today is sexually driven for obvious Darwinian, very powerful Darwinian reasons, because it's just so important. It determines the next generation. And ultimately, that's all that matters, right? If you don't reproduce, you're gone. Your genes, you're gone. You're just history. So it's a very powerful force. So cyborgs, what would they do? Well, as I can imagine, once the reproductive drives become relatively less important compared to this humongous capacity of the future brains, the artificial brains, then I can imagine the traditional drives will be just drowned, swamped, dwarfed by these new capacities, new needs. So I can imagine two cyborgs having intellectual orgasms with each other over pure mathematics. Why not? So this whole issue of species dominance, it's not quite yet mainstream, but very close. And already there have been a couple of surveys that I'm aware of asking people whether humanity should or should not build these artefacts. And the very first time I asked this question to an audience, I was giving a Cosmos Terran speech too. Before I asked them, before I got the result back, my gut feeling was that it'd probably be something like 90-10, 90%, 10% in favour of Terran. But when they actually voted, I was shocked that the answer was about 50-50. And a couple of days later, the idea occurred to me, maybe it's 50-50 because they don't really understand the issues. It's all too new for them. So they're voting almost randomly. And if you get a random vote, of course, it'll be about 50-50. And this phenomenon, 40-60, 60-40, 50-50, it kept occurring until people come up to me and say, I feel, not me, but the person coming up to me, I feel very ambivalent about this. On the one hand, it's the idea of building these godlike machines, these intellects, is awe-inspiring. It's magnificent. It's a whole universe out there, right? Billions of years old, and our pathetic little human lives snuffed out in 80 years, blah, 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 blah. Awe-inspiring. Like a religion almost. But on the other hand, if there really is an intellect war and it kills billions of people, that's about the worst thing you could imagine. It's absolutely horrific. So it's awe-inspiring and horrific at the same time. Now that's how I feel. I'm strongly ambivalent about this. Privately, I'm cosmist. I think humanity should go ahead and build these things. But publicly, I say on the one hand, on the other hand, I'm presenting both cases. So in the early days, I was surprised that it was 50-50. And although lately I've noticed, with the really young audiences, like around 20 years old, often computer science students at universities, when I asked, both in America and in China, where I live, that percentage is creeping up. It's now, I sometimes get 70-80% cosmists. They're cosmists. They say they really want to see these machines being built. So maybe there's an age difference. Hard to say. Men, women, I don't notice any difference. I've perceived no. Now, in a couple of years, I would very much like to see the pollsters, the opinion polls, people, the companies, like Gallup, for example, going out. Once the issue's gone mainstream, and people have had enough time and they've had the opportunity to think a bit about the issues. Once they've been exposed enough in the media, newspapers and television and movies and documentaries and whatever. Once they're fairly familiar with the issues, then they can vote in an informed way. And it'll be very interesting to see what kinds of correlations come up. For example, well, just off the top of my head, the far right, let's say the religious right, how would they vote? Would they more likely to be Terran than cosmists? Would they prefer to take the cyborg route? Would they deny it? So it seems to me there's a lot of scope here for the sociologist to study this question. What correlations exist between social groups and opinions regarding the species dominance issues? Very interesting.